In 1976, the mayor of Montreal, Jean Drapeau, made a rather confident guarantee about the upcoming Summer Olympics. He publicly declared an Olympic deficit was as impossible as a man having a baby. The final budget overshot its target by more than 700%. The local papers printed cartoons of a heavily pregnant mayor, while the city of Montreal was left holding a billion-dollar bag, a debt that took 30 full years to finally pay off. It's easy to mock political hubris, but Oxford professor Bent Flyvbjerg wanted to see if Montreal was actually an anomaly. He built a global database tracking over 16,000 major projects to see exactly how often human beings get things right. This visualization shows the grim reality. Out of thousands of global projects, exactly 0.5% hit targets for budget, schedule, and expected benefits. On the flip side, over 91% bleed past budget, blow past deadlines, or fail at both. When humanity decides to build something massive, severe dysfunction isn't the exception. Statistically speaking, it is the absolute default. Look at this standard bell curve of human height. Most cluster near the middle, making the data highly predictable. But project delays follow a fat tail distribution. This long, thick tail means that extreme, catastrophic outliers, black swan events, are highly probable. When you hit that fat tail, the consequences are brutal. In the early 2000s, soaring IT project costs forced the retail giant Kmart into bankruptcy. In South Carolina, a nuclear plant executive was actually sentenced to federal prison for trying to hide massive delays from regulators. The behavioral trigger for these disasters usually boils down to 4 words: fast thinking, slow acting. We get excited by an ambitious vision and rush the planning phase based on gut instinct, eager to break ground. Because the plan is shallow, execution slows to a crawl. The site encounters unexpected roadblocks, which cause delays, which breed more complications, trapping the project in an endlessly expensive cycle of triage. To land in that elusive 0.5% of successful projects, the timeline has to be completely inverted. We need to think slow and act fast. In 1929, architects designed a skyscraper roughly the shape of a pencil in the middle of Manhattan. 18 months later, from the very first sketch to opening day, the Empire State Building was finished, weeks ahead of schedule and nearly 20% under budget. The secret was an incredibly rigorous, unhurried planning phase. Iterating ideas using paper blueprints, pixels, and spreadsheet models is incredibly cheap. If a design fails on paper, nobody loses a dime. This requires actively avoiding the uniqueness trap. Your project is rarely a bespoke snowflake. By using reference class forecasting, anchoring your budget and timeline entirely to historical data from past similar projects, you strip out human optimism and plan for reality. Effective planning requires letting go of the romantic idea that your vision has never been attempted. You have to treat the endeavor as a repeatable data problem. But the moment you approve that plan, fire up the heavy machinery, and spend the first real dollar, the clock starts. You are now racing against what project managers call the window of doom. Every additional month the project sits unfinished, the mathematical probability increases that an unpredictable disaster, a policy shift, a supply chain collapse, or an economic recession will derail the work. The most effective engineering trick for outrunning that window is modularity. It's the strategy of building something massive by endlessly repeating a small, standardized block. Take a single basic component, perfect its design, and lock it in. Once it works, you simply stamp out thousands of identical copies, allowing them to snap together and scale up into staggering infrastructure. Look at this massive solar array. It appears incredibly complex, but it is entirely modular. Once the initial photovoltaic panel and mounting bracket are engineered, expanding the farm is just an exercise in copy and paste. These scale-free systems offer immense advantages. The workers repeat the exact same task thousands of times, mastering the movement. Uncertainty vanishes, and the cost per unit steadily drops as the system scales. Speed in the physical world doesn't come from cracking the whip on the workforce. It comes from clicking together proven, identical modules so fast that disaster cannot catch you. We tend to idolize the risk-taking visionary. We want our architects and leaders to swing for the fences, invent new materials, and design structures the world has never seen. But scale punishes novelty. True success at scale demands a craftsman mindset, a humble reliance on boring, deeply tested techniques with known variables. Project leaders need the institutional discipline to say no. No to untested beta technologies. No to unique, ego-driven monument building. No to trying to invent a new way of pouring concrete just to leave a personal mark. This rule scales across human ambition. Whether you are throwing up a 1,000-bed emergency hospital in 9 days, migrating a global corporate IT system, or writing a comprehensive historical biography, mastering the mundane, modular blocks is non-negotiable. If you want to achieve the monumental, you have to do the quiet, unglamorous work first. You plan patiently and safely in the harbor, anchoring your ideas to hard data and modular parts, so that when it's time to build, you can tear through the storm and reach the other side.
In 1976, Montreal was preparing to host the Summer Olympics, and Mayor Jean Drapeau made a very bold public guarantee. He declared that an Olympic deficit was biologically impossible, exactly as impossible as a man having a baby. The Games ended up costing 7 times their original budget. To eventually finish constructing the main stadium, the city took on a $1 billion debt that took local taxpayers exactly 30 years to pay off. Financial disasters like this repeat across industries and decades. When leaders commit to megaprojects, systemic failure is often the default outcome. The James Webb Space Telescope was originally expected to take 12 years to finish. It took 19 and cost $8.8 billion, exceeding its budget by 450%. By the time the Scottish Parliament building was completed, it was 3 full years late and nearly 1,000% over budget.
This chart shows what happens when you look at a database of 16,000 major global projects. It tracks outcomes across 20 different fields, and it reveals that a mere 0.5% of these projects actually hit their intended targets for cost, time, and benefits. The remaining 99.5% fall into what statisticians call a fat tail distribution. In a normal bell curve, extreme events are incredibly rare. But in this fat tail, catastrophic budget overruns aren't weird anomalies. They are a highly probable feature of the system. Yet there are exceptions. The Empire State Building went from its first architectural sketch to a grand opening in just 18 months, finishing weeks ahead of schedule and millions of dollars under budget. Why do nearly all large-scale ambitions end up drowning in the fat tail, while a tiny fraction somehow bypass the trap entirely? The trouble starts with how our brains process excitement. When a leader falls in love with a vision, they often rely on fast, intuitive thinking to push it forward. They minimize the complex planning phase so they can get straight to the satisfying part, breaking ground. But as soon as shovels hit the dirt, reality hits back. Unforeseen terrain, weather, or supply blockages appear, and the site grinds to a halt. When you're paying an army of workers and renting heavy equipment, every single day of delay burns through millions in overhead. The successful 0.5% use the exact opposite approach. They adopt a philosophy of slow thinking. They stretch out the planning phase for as long as possible, because iterating a design on a computer or a piece of paper is incredibly cheap and entirely safe. To prepare a 90-minute animated film, a studio like Pixar will draw over 2,000 rough storyboards. They test scenes, rewrite dialogue, and throw away entire sequences over and over again, completely breaking and fixing the movie long before a single frame is actually animated. During this slow planning, they also rely on reference classes. Instead of guessing how long a task will take based on internal optimism, they look outward, anchoring their schedules to hard data from similar projects that have already been completed in the real world. By maximizing their time in the blueprint phase, successful creators expose every flaw and solve every logistical puzzle before it can cost them real money. They engineer the risk out of the project before it physically exists. Once that rigorous blueprint is locked, the strategy flips completely. The execution phase is highly vulnerable to unexpected events, things outside of your control, like a sudden policy shift or an economic downturn. The only way to survive this highly dangerous phase is to finish it as fast as physically possible. To achieve extreme speed, you rely on modularity. You construct large, complex structures by snapping together small, easily repeatable blocks. In engineering, this creates a scale-free system. Once you perfect the design and assembly of a single module, you can multiply it 10 times or 10,000 times without introducing any new logistical complexity. We see this operating flawlessly in modern solar farms. You don't build a giant bespoke machine. You arrange thousands of identical panels in endless rows. Major technology companies do the exact same thing when they expand their computing power. They build massive server farms by simply copying and pasting identical racks of hardware into a warehouse. This logic explains the incredible speed of the Empire State Building. The architects designed the floors to be as similar to one another as possible. Instead of building a custom monument, the workers operated a vertical assembly line, repeating the same tasks layer by layer. Modularity removes the terrifying unknowns of a massive, one-off construction and replaces them with a highly practiced, deeply predictable series of small repetitions. Ambition often carries a compulsion to leave a unique mark. Leaders given oversight of a massive budget frequently feel they must pioneer untested technologies or commission radical, never-before-seen designs. But injecting novelty into the physical execution phase strips away your safety nets. If you are building something completely bespoke, you can't rely on reference classes from past data, and you can't use proven modular components. You are flying blind, guaranteeing delays and inviting massive costs. The people who actually succeed at this scale approach the work with the discipline of a craftsman. They rely on mature technology and deeply experienced teams who have worked together before. Success at this scale requires a specific rhythm. Dream wildly and iterate endlessly during the cheap, safe planning phase. Then, break that vision down into boring, repeatable modules and execute them with ruthless, proven speed.